You. Okay, so I'm gonna make a new sim. Keep the same map, and we'll switch over to this. We'll have God mode enabled just because if we want to place a storm down, but we're not gonna necessarily be doing that all the time. But yeah, what's going on, guys? For those people who are here, welcome. I'm gonna full screen this so we get the most out of it. Okay, so Beryl reached Cat 5 status not too long ago. We reached it about an hour ago officially, but it was probably a Category 5 earlier in the day as well, maybe, based on satellite presentation. Earliest Category 5 on record, plus the other numerous other records it's also had from earliest Cat 4 rapid intensification and the MDR around here, around this area. Right now, in real life, it's about here, and it should be moving to Jamaica by Wednesday. So, a little bit of a homage to it for her getting it done, having having Cyclone Simulator run in the background as we discuss stuff. I actually pause it right now, just so I can actually open up Discord. So let me actually do that right now. Put you guys on like the blank screen. Don't expect many people to tune into this stream. Probably make another one in the morning, or when I wake up. I actually plan to go sleep earlier today than I normally do. But it's alright. We'll make it out. Alright, just waiting on Discord to open. When it's fully open, and then I can let people know about the stream. We'll go back to the simulator so you guys can see it. Alright. Discord should be open by now. It's extremely slow for no apparent reason. I don't know. That might have to be something to do with like my operating system. But it should be fine. Alright, we're back. It's somewhat loaded. There we are. Okay. The stream is lagging quite badly. That's a bit of an issue. See what's going on. Okay, just have this open. Still lagging quite badly, but it's alright. Just minimize Discord. It's still lagging quite a bit, so I might get rid of Discord just to help out a bit. I think I might actually do that, but it's lagging out of control. I'll actually close it because I don't want to take any resources away from stream. Everything's taking forever to like respawn. I don't like that. Alright. Everything should become much more responsive soon. There we go. It's somewhat more responsive, but Might have an issue here or there. Just let the stream like go by. Shouldn't be lagging this long. We should be back now. No, it's still lagging more than it should be. It's fine now. Right, just minimize that tab. Just full screen this again. But yeah, this version of Tropical Cyclone Simulator, the original one, the Earth map is smaller. Well, not smaller. The actual Earth map isn't shorter at all, but the amount that you see for each basin is bigger on my version of it compared to the original. In the original, the Atlantic Basin only goes up to about this part of the British Isles here. So it only goes up to around like here-ish. I think it goes up to here-ish and then it cuts off. And then 60 degrees north around here. Around here is where it cuts off. Maybe a little bit north, like around here. 60 degrees north is where it cuts off as the pole. In this simulation, 70 degrees is where the pole is, which is accurate to real life. The actual poles are from like 66.5 to 90, so we have 70, so we have some polar temperatures in there. For this, we're mainly just watching to see what happens. If Chris that went into the Bahamas, but weakened down his head toward Florida, eastern Florida. In this simulation, at least for the Atlantic, on average, there are about, I would say, about 12 to 15 storms that form in the Atlantic alone. If we're using the entire map, it's probably going to be closer to like 20, 21. But since the Eastern Pacific has a decent amount of map share, and there's land that's also visible on both sides, especially Africa on the eastern side of the map, that takes up a bit of space. So storms have to really generate in Western Africa or in the actual Atlantic to actually get going, or else they just die. If Leslie, it's moving into the Gulf, it dies out. Knowlton's there. Nadine's there. So yeah, if this would happen in real life, this would be a pretty average season. It's October. By the time you get to November, you should only have about like maybe one or two storms, maybe. Oscars are at 15. If I were to look at the official, well, the tab list up here, actually check it out. We are at, this is what the timeline looks like. We are at 16 named storms searching hurricanes, but we're only at 4 majors since environmental conditions haven't been quite right. We have had one Cat 5, and that's at 180. That was Ernesta, and that formed down here in the warmer water off of West Africa because the equator is right there. Unlike in real life, this simulation is based on height and width, and it's used a cosine to calculate temperature. So because of that, the temperatures aren't completely realistic. In some areas, they're completely off from where they should be at this time of year. So like, for example, the water temperatures around Canada, eastern Canada, are far warmer than what they would actually be in real life. In real life, all of this will be ice up until about here. And then this will be very cold water. And then this green stuff will still be here on North Carolina southward. Maybe not along the coastline, but the green up here past the Outer Banks is not normal in real life. But for the simulation, it makes sense because by the time you get to summer, you get to a temperature that's similar to real life. And that's what we're trying to simulate. We're trying to get tropical cyclone seasons that make sense. That's what temperatures that are given. Not necessarily having a realistic winter. But at some point, I hope to learn more Java and actually code this program so that we don't have to deal with cosine waves and stuff like that. We'll have the actual climatology built in for everything. And then from there, all you really have to do is like change like where you want stuff to go. Like if I wanted a storm, not a storm, but if I wanted more troughing over the eastern US at a given time, like let's say I want it to set it for like August 15th or something like that, August 15th to the 30th, where you have consistent troughing eastern US. I want that to be a thing where you could do it, and then you draw the general shape of the trough and where the strongest anomaly will be. Like you should be able to do that in God mode or something like that, but not too extreme to the point where it breaks the simulation, if you know what I mean. Like if you want to draw a big like ridge here that forms in like late June, you can do that. If you want to make the average precipitation in this area go above average in like the Caribbean, for example, and that causes more tropical waves to spawn, you could do that. That's something that I'm looking at doing. Other stuff in the simulation, I don't know. I haven't figured out how to get the button mapping to work. But these are the toggles. A is to step 1 hour while pause. This, I actually never used this one before. Okay, yeah, that allows you to skip 1 hour in simulation, but I don't believe you can actually do that with whatchamacallit, with the game. It's with the actual analysis. I don't believe you can do that, unfortunately. It's E cycle through map layers, and then T cycle to do track display. I am currently on active tropical cyclone tracks. W changes the intensity indicators, and then M is for magnifying glass. V is controlled speed simulation. Right now we're on normal speed, and left and right arrow allow you to move through analysis. We'll show you what magnifying glass does. This will lag the computer. We'll show you what it does. So magnifying glass gets rid of the pixel layout and gives you the real, the real scope of where the actual temperatures are. So you can see that the 25-degree isotherm in this yellow, it may seem like it goes all the way up into like this New York Harbor or something, but it doesn't. It stops right here. I believe if half of a tile is covered in a certain temperature, it flips over. So while here is 25, down here, up here is like 24.8. So it's gonna flip eventually. It's gonna take a little bit. If you have stark contrasts between temperature, like I do, you can see temperature boundaries really easily. So this is a 20-degree boundary for Celsius. This is the 15-degree boundary up here. This is the 10-degree boundary. And this is the 5-degree boundary. The 0-degree boundary is the red that pops up. That was earlier in the simulation. And also, luckily enough, let's get to see more. This is the 30-degree boundary here. And this is where tropical cyclones get really intense and they intensify much more quickly. And down here in that orange shading, that's the 35-degree isotherm. Or approaching 36, but that's the 35-degree isotherm. And that goes up to 40. But magnifying glass can make your computer lag, so I recommend not using it. You can also use it to check other stuff, so you can use it on like land, and you can see elevation using your magnifying glass, at least for right now, because lower elevations are wetter than higher elevations are. So if it's moist in this part of Africa, you can clearly see where the elevation is. You can know, like, okay, if a tropical wave moves into here, there's a good chance it might die. For jet stream, for winds, it doesn't lag your computer. It just tells you what the exact wind at the given location on your mouse is. That way you're not confused. Same thing for upper level wind, although I think for here it's more useful. The shear jet stream up here. This changes with the seasons. And this is your wind shear. Just tells you the direction of the shear. This isn't the direction of the upper level winds. This is just the direction of the lower level winds and the upper level winds. If you mix them together, what the overall direction shear is. So the wind's moving from the southwest or something. In the low levels, moving to like the north in the upper level, the northwest in the upper levels, and it's northeasterly shear. That's sea surface temperature anomalies. Right there, I'll go back. This tells you how much warmer or colder the sea is compared to where it should be. So a lot of the Caribbean, at least right now in simulation, is colder than where it should be, about like 1 to 2 degrees Celsius colder. And then the warmer areas are in this orange. Subtropics are running around 1.7 degrees higher than where they should be. And that's why you have these warm waters in both areas, even though this should be warmer than this. So we'll keep the simulation running. See what happens. The Western Caribbean is warm. The Eastern Caribbean is cold. I have Delilah in the Western Eastern Pacific. Gentle. You have Dexter. You have Aaron. Fernand. So we got about like 4 storms that spawn in August. September can be really active or it can be really quiet. It really just depends. September, it typically is the most active month. You have Gabrielle that moves through the Bahamas. It dies out in Louisiana. It's October now, stuff is starting to cool. In a moment, eventually we should begin to start seeing, towards the end of the month, you start seeing red colors pop up at the top of the screen. So that's that 0 degree isotherm. You can see them now, they're popping up quite quickly. And then once they get like dark red like they are now, that's more of an indication of it's cold enough for there to be sea ice there. At some point I do want to add a sea ice equation where once sea surface temperature drops below -1, there's a chance that sea ice begins to form. But once it drops below -3, it's almost a 100% chance that any water will turn into sea ice. And then how long the air above it stays that way, or the water stays cold, will determine how thick the ice will be. And if it can survive a melting season, then the thickness will increase, and then that will make it harder for it to melt in consecutive seasons. But all ice, no matter the thickness, will melt if it gets too far away from the poles. Like if it gets drifted away or something like that. I have to add that in, but if ice drifts too far away from the poles, it doesn't matter how thick it is, it will melt. It will just take probably a little bit longer. Alright, let's see. Okay, it seems the 20C isotherm wall has been kept away from the eastern coastline. It was almost able to touch like the mid-Atlantic here, but it wasn't able to go any further. So now it's going to start retreating back to its summer position around Newfoundland. So it's going to rush from here at its peak, and it's going to go back to Newfoundland unless there's a warmer pocket, unless there's a cold pocket of water there in peak season, in which case the isotherm might be farther south and west than where it should be. Southeastern Mediterranean slowly starting to warm up now as well. Mediterranean is still like half and half. Italy's the dividing line between warm and cold in the Mediterranean. It's June in the Atlantic, so almost all the development areas that you would typically expect are open. You have Hurricane Arthur that moves north. We have more storms that are forming. That could form. Another wave that comes Bertha. Goes to the Bahamas as a Cat 1 hurricane. Cristobal, it's a Cat 2 at peak. Still a Cat 1. It gets towards the Bahamas but weakens drastically. The Gulf is cooler than what it should be. It has some upwelling going on with it. Dolly makes it westward, but it doesn't strengthen much more. It does re-strengthen now and becomes a Cat 2 that hits South Carolina. Faye's in the deep tropics, passes right over St. Vincent. That's a Cat 5, pulls away. And it weakens in the southwest Atlantic. Gonzalo's a hurricane that hits Central America. Hannah's a Cat 4 that comes off the African coast. Isaias hits Louisiana, it seems. A lot of extratropical cyclones as well in the North Atlantic. Josephine's a tropical storm. It starts with Central America. Kyle hits the Dominican Republic as a Cat 3. It weakens down as it moves towards the Panhandle of Florida. Marco forms out in the open Atlantic, but it does make landfall in South Carolina. Season should be starting to wind down right about now. Most of the Caribbean, if we look, is still warm enough for a major hurricane, so we'll see what happens. Paulette forms close to the Bahamas. Doesn't make landfall there, it makes landfall in the Carolinas. And the season should be wrapping up. If a storm does get in the Caribbean, it still has warm water to work with if it can get in this pocket right here. But if it can't get in the pocket, I don't think it'll be able to do much. Okay, new season. And we already have Anna on the first week of January. And just as a quick recap of last season, we had 16 named storms, 13 hurricanes, 3 majors, and 1 Cat 5. The only Cat 5 was Faye, and that pulled away from the Leeward Islands just in time. And we'll get the tracks, overall tracks, so everyone can see how it does. So, we have a clear cluster around the Bahamas. Well, generally off the U.S. East Coast, but not really in the Caribbean. We only have 2 real Caribbean storms in the Eastern Caribbean. We have 2 Western Caribbean storms, and then we have 2 Gulf impacts. But most storms are in the south, or in the get into the subtropical Atlantic, or near the Bahamas, and then they either get into the Gulf, dissipate, or they hit the Carolinas and then move up into the pattern. This was Anna's track, formed here in the Gulf, moved in southeast Louisiana around where New Orleans is, and dissipated. We're now going to be looking at all storm tracks. This might be a little bit laggier, but we're going to have all storm tracks here so we can visualize where the jet stream is. Currently, it seems like the jet stream is somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. It gets pretty far south. We did see some storms in the Gulf, or around 25, 24 degrees north. Have some storms going into northern Africa, into Morocco, and more storms doing that. So the jet stream's pretty far south, but as time goes on, it should start lifting north eventually. You see in the North Atlantic, towards the top of the screen, with this giant sea ice pack up here. But at some point, this is going to start melting rapidly, and the ice is going to disappear as the warmer water moves north. And a jet stream is actually going to catch up with that melting ice. So it should be where the melting ice is here. This should be around where the peak of the jet stream could be on the range list. If we're looking at actual, like where the jet stream on average will be, the jet stream on average should be somewhere around here where it goes through the UK, around there, like through northern Europe and through southern Canada is where the average position of the jet will be. As we can see, there's more storms up north. There's not as many cutting low riders into the deep tropics or anything like that. They're all in the northern U.S. or in the North Atlantic between 40 to 60 degrees north, and that's going to keep the shear in the deep tropics low. Did have one storm at 35, but we're not going to see too many more of those as time goes on. It's one of the rare moments. We have some leftover, maybe some leftover ice potentially in the North Atlantic, and then we still have this large area of below 5 and below 10, but we're starting to have these 20s creep up further north. All the main development areas of tropical cyclones in the Western Atlantic are good to go. The Gulf is good. The Southwest Atlantic is good, and the Caribbean's good. And in the main development region, the place where storms actually form is warm to slightly cool, is warm. In the north central part, it's colder than what it should be, so storms won't be able to survive this too easily. And then towards the equator, we have the 36-degree isotherm down here. This is a rare sight, but this should disappear rather quickly. Just letting you know, we have all colors that would realistically be able to pop up in this simulation on this map. We have our ice, our polar waters, our subpolar waters technically are up here, our temperate waters in these blues, our subtropical waters in this green, and then our tropical waters in this yellow, and our extreme warmth in this 35-degree isotherm, but that should disappear rather quickly. There is a solid 30-degree, I didn't mention this, there's a solid 30-degree isotherm around this though, so if you do get a low-riding storm that comes around, like pops around here, you should have more energy to work with. Also in the Eastern Pacific, there's some 30-degree isotherm, some 30-degree Celsius waters here as well. So the storm that does get here will have more energy to pop off if it needs it. We're looking to see if these 30-degree isotherms, however, expand north into the Caribbean, where storms are actually going to be forming. Bill was a short-lived storm north of the islands. Claudette probably be a short-lived storm. It's not going to be a Cat 2 that goes to the Bahamas. Cat 1 also hits Louisiana. Andreas is the first storm in the Eastern Pacific. It's Cat 5. Fred is a Cat 4. It gets stuff that energy. It's Cat 5. Hits the Yucatan. Weakens sharply, but then it gets ejected into the upper pattern. Jet stream's pretty far north. Amani forms. That looks like it might go towards North Carolina. Yeah, it hits us at Cat 3 on the South Carolina-North Carolina border. Kate hits South Trinidad and Tobago as a Cat 5. And seas is starting to slightly cool down. Eastern Pacific is more 30-degree Celsius waters in it than the Atlantic does. So because of that, if we do get a storm there, it should pop off. As long as it doesn't go too far south. Have Larry as a quick spin up. And then these other storms just move across. The jet stream's trying to move south. We have our first storm in the southern U.S. It's almost getting into Mexico. Last tropical waves are struggling to get going. Mindy is a tropical storm that goes to the Yucatan and the Bay of Campeche. Now we're in December, so if a storm does have time to form, if it wants to get really strong, if it wants to get really strong, it has to form around like the 8 or 9, the 7 to 10 degree latitude areas. It's to form within this area right here, pick up some steam, and then move northwestward. But I doubt that's going to happen, as if we look for other parameters, moisture is low, wind shear, it's going to be quite high. Sea surface temperature anomalies are quite good for the system if one does form down here. But low moisture and high wind shear are going to make it hard for anything to form. As always, we're going to run out the clock. If another storm does form, we will catch it. Okay, nothing formed. This, if we go back a little bit, this is the 2027 hurricane season up here. So let's see what we got. We got 2 Cat 5s in the Eastern Pacific transitioning over from the Atlantic side. 2 Cat 5s in the Atlantic. 1 hits Central America. The northern coast of Honduras, it scrapes by and hits the Yucatan. I believe that was Fred. Kate hits the area eastern Venezuela, probably also northern Guyana. Hits right under Trinidad and Tobago. Moves into the Caribbean, weakens down, weakens down, and I think it dissipates before it hits Central America. Last time I checked. We have a storm that hits the North Carolina, South and North Carolina border. It's like a major hurricane. A major hurricane impact in the east coast of Florida around Fort Lauderdale. And we have Cat 2 impact on the northeast coast of Mexico. And plenty of tropical storm impacts for the Gulf. But not too many high impact storms in the Gulf this year. Noticeably quiet. The main development region has had barely any activity. Almost all the storms formed in the western part of the basin around 60 degrees west. So we'll continue going from there. So we'll see how what the sea surface temperature system looks like. Just had Alex randomly. Okay. So we had Alex in the 3rd week of January. Now we have other storms. There, keep going. The Gulf is relatively cool. The Caribbean is cool. These areas are both cooler than what they should be. The ice pack around Iceland is doing really well. It's a large ice pack. It's hitting the northern area. It's also in the northern parts of the UK, around where Scotland is. The snowpack doesn't change, but it's expansive. The 20 degrees Celsius isotherm is pretty expansive well. It encompasses a large amount of the Mediterranean, half of it. It encompasses a large amount of the North Atlantic, a little bit off the coast of Baja California on the west side, on the left side of your screen. You can see it here, a little bit of 20 Celsius right here, or lower, looking at possibly like 18 or below. The ice is starting to melt away from the UK pretty rapidly now. Spring should be in full effect. There's almost no more snow there. The 25 degree isotherm is peaking into the Mediterranean from the Red Sea. The ice pack is melting rapidly. The jet stream is moving north. Almost the entire Gulf is now covered in 25 degrees Celsius waters, and so is almost the Bahamas too. And Turks and Caicos. Bahamas are in the 25 degree isotherm fully. The Caribbean is a solid, looks to be 27 degrees Celsius. You have some 30 degrees Celsius isotherms popping up off the west coast of Africa, and we have some 30 degree isotherms popping off the in the eastern Caribbean. The Gulf is still cooler than what it should be, but the 30 degree isotherm in the Caribbean is starting to expand a bit more. Seeing more 30 degree isotherms expanding into the central Caribbean. You have more on the Pacific side of Central America, also trying to overshoot into the Atlantic. Bonnie's a Cat 2 that forms out in the open Atlantic, but it seems like it wants to go for another go in the subtropics. and it makes landfall in Texas. The Eastern Caribbean is quite warm. Calling some major hurricanes to Yucatan. Danielle becomes a Cat 5 north of Cuba. And Hispaniola hits Cuba as a Cat 5 and moves into Florida. The 30-degree isotherm is still quite large, plus 29. Earl is a Cat 3 in the middle of the Atlantic. Moves out. Farah becomes a Cat 5 in the main development region. Gaston also becomes a Cat 5. That hits Hispaniola as a Cat 4. Farah moves into Mexico as it weakens rapidly over the Gulf. Hermine is a Cat 4 over the eastern main development region. Idris is a Cat 4 that hits Cuba and weakens in the Gulf. Julia moves north. We're starting to see our first ice pack. Carl is moving into the jet stream. Will impact Europe. We're now in the later part of the season. I'll show off another mechanic. We have the cone feature. We can tell where storms are likely to go based off this cone, but we'll see if this storm actually follows the cone. Lisa tries to follow the cone, and it does quite well. It doesn't follow this part of the cone where it dips in the Caribbean, but it follows the cone where it makes it East Coast U.S. landfall. Most of the Caribbean is at 29 degrees Celsius. Most of it. Some of it's at 28, but most of it's at 29. So we'll put an average of 29 with average around 29 is like the minimum for most of the Caribbean. A decent amount of it's at 29.5, and we have patches of 30 and 31 in there. So we can get a storm in there like Nicole, major hurricane, Cat 3, goes right to the islands. Can have a big impact. December, Paula's right here. Paula comes to hurricanes to Yucatan. If we can get another storm in here, the Caribbean is still plenty warm. Caribbean's still plenty warm for a storm, if one can even form down there. Oh, Richard formed just in time in the deep tropics, and it's now bending into the flow. Okay. That's Richard's track, but we're gonna get Richard back on here. We'll keep his track in there. So this was the 2028 hurricane season. What we noticed, there are a lot of impacts. There are a lot of impacts around the Greater Antilles, Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica. Cuba especially has been got hit very hard. A lot of major hurricanes in that area. Florida only suffers from one fully tropical cyclone impact. It has one tropical wave that goes through it, but only suffers from one tropical cyclone impact. Same as Texas and Louisiana. We have a tropical depression that hits Texas as well. We have very few storms that actually go into Mexico that's not the Yucatan. You have a major hurricane that misses the Yucatan by a sliver. But in general, majority of the activity is around the Caribbean islands. The warmest water was also near the Caribbean islands, so this makes sense. And then we have Cat 4, a stray Cat 4 in the eastern main development region. But not too many storms in the main development region. Well, no, there are storms in the main development region, but the majority of the strong storms were in the Caribbean. You had 2 strong storms in the main development region that got into the Caribbean later on, and we have plenty of tropical storms that fizzled out. Alright, let's continue. Now, the Caribbean is still warm, so if something wants to form down there, it could. We now have 20-degree isotherms, below 20 degrees Celsius isotherms in the northern main development region. But those have petered out. Now we're stuck at above 20 Celsius, but it's still pretty cold. The ice pack seems a little bit shorter than normal, but it's still quite large. 25 Celsius waters are confined to the Red Sea. Almost all the Great Lakes have below 20 degrees Celsius isotherms within them. Almost all of Lake Michigan was a light blue, but now it should begin warming up again. The Caribbean is still set. Most of it is hovering around a decent 27, patches of 28. The Equatorial Pacific has patches of 30 popping up. Everything's warming up quite nicely. The Gulf, larger, most of it is 25 or above. The southern half is 26. Starting to see some 25 degrees Celsius isotherms pop up on the southeast coast of the U.S. So starting to spread northward. Soon we should anticipate the ice cap to completely collapse up there. Starts to collapse in the North Atlantic. That's beginning to happen right now. Sticking around for quite a bit longer, but it's beginning to collapse. At the first tropical depression, seems like we're already off to a great start. Arlene, and we have Brett in the Atlantic Ocean. We have Brett becomes a hurricane that hits Florida. Arlene was a hurricane out to sea. Cindy impacts Florida. So we already have 3 storms. This looks to be Dawn. Dawn's a major hurricane that misses the Windward Islands. The ice cap in the North Atlantic is completely collapsed by this point, almost. Yep, it's completely gone now. The Atlantic is starting to warm up in places. We're seeing in the main development region 29, 28, high 28s, 29, some patches of 30. The Caribbean, we're seeing mostly 28s, some 29 in there. The Gulf, we're seeing 27s, 28s, seeing 27s and 28s. Maybe like one singular patch of 29 somewhere in there. Off the southeast coast, we're seeing 26, 27, 28. And in the East Pacific, we're seeing 28 closer to Mexico, and closer to the equator, seeing 29, 30. And 6L that forms comes Adrian in East Pacific. Cat 5 Emily passes through the island. Franklin Cat 5 passes north of the Leeward Islands. The Lesser Antilles. The Gulf is warming up more. Caribbean's starting to warm up more. We might see 30-degree isotherm pop up somewhere around here. We have this large storm. We have this large extratropical storm. It's coming off the U.S. coast, so there's a trough here, but there might be a ridge building back in. We have, let's see, we have 28s, 29s in the Eastern Gulf, especially around Florida. 25, 29.5, 28s around the Bahamas. 27 are at North Carolina's latitude. Caribbean, a lot of 28s, some 29s in there. Main development region, 20. Well, no, this is the main development region right here. The tropical Atlantic out here, 29s mostly, 30s, patches of 31. The Eastern Mediterranean, it's warm enough to get a tropical cyclone. Cat 5 Gert in the middle of the tropical Atlantic. It should regenerate here though. Cat 3 Harold. Tropical storm Gert makes landfall in Louisiana. Yeah, if a extratropical cyclone does get into the Mediterranean Sea and does weaken down and slow down magically. Hey Squid 05, this is Tropical Cyclone Simulator. This is a game about tropical cyclones, in case you're wondering. But yeah, if one of these storms gets into the Eastern Mediterranean and slows down, just a lack of wind shear, it could easily become a subtropical storm. We have Idalia. Now we're going to look at the cone for this one. This one seems to be in the best position for a U.S. landfall, a major U.S. landfall. We're looking at tropical storm. We have a jet stream that's looking like it's going up. Where's the cone take it? The cone takes it into the Gulf, but I believe it's going to go up. Yep. We have a Cat 4 that's going to make landfall in the Carolinas. How strong now? Okay, we have a Cat 3 that makes landfall in South Carolina. It's a major U.S. landfall. I wasn't wrong. It passed close to the Bahamas. It missed the Great Apico by a little bit. Still some 30 degrees Celsius waters out there where it just passed through, so they're starting to cool down now. But if you get another storm out there, like Jose, that just popped up, we can get like another like Cat 1 out there. We got it. Now we're gonna start watching. We're still gonna watch the western side of the Atlantic, but the eastern side is also pretty warm. So we got plenty of 29s, 30s. The Gulf is at 28 for the most part. Katia gets in the western Atlantic. It doesn't do much, and it disintegrates. Okay, the North Atlantic is cooling quite fast. It's cooling at a very quick rate. The at area Manor, Massachusetts, it's a lot cooler than where it should be for this time of the year. It got to 20 degrees Celsius early in December, so I imagine the rest of this should fall pretty quickly. And the Long Island Sound below 20 degrees Celsius. Caribbean's still warm. It could still form up a storm down there. Some patches of 30 near the land. The Great Lakes starting to cool down. Ice pack is greatly expanding in the North Atlantic. We now have ice pack starting to encroach into the North Sea. The rate of cooling along in the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic is starting to slow down. The 20 degrees Celsius isotherm is so close to the coast of New Jersey. Most of the coast of France is below 10 degrees Celsius right now. And it should remain that way until about May. And then that 15 degree isotherm, that 10 degree isotherm, that 15 degree isotherm, or like that 10 degree isotherm that's above 10, the 10 to 15 degree isotherm should begin lifting north. And should encompass the coasts of northern France by peak summer. Now, the Gulf is cold. Most of it's below 25 C. Eastern Pacific's looking much better. The Caribbean is warm, but around the Greater Antilles struggling with a bit of 24 Celsius popping up. The main development region's a bit cool. In the middle and eastern portions, around the west, around the Eastern Caribbean, we're looking at 28, 29, 30 degrees Celsius patch right there. North of Suriname. The Gulf is so cold, even in June, so we're not going to see much development there. Southeast U.S. is starting to warm up a little bit. Have Alberta in the Caribbean. Southeast U.S. is starting to warm up a bit more. It's taking a while, but starting to warm up a bit more. The Gulf is finally starting to get its act together. So it should all be above 25 C soon. A little bit longer. Okay, the Gulf is above 25 C. Beryl forms out here in the Northern Main Development Region. Although it's down here, so this is in the subtropics. It's forming in the Canary Current in real life, but there's no Canary Current in this universe, so we'll just call this the Eastern Subtropical Atlantic. Yeah, we'll call it that. Most of the Caribbean is at 28 in its northern part. 27 in its east part. 28 is looking for most of it, but in the southwest part of the Caribbean, we're looking at 29 and a patch of 30. So if a storm could get in there, it'll have a lot of energy to work with. But that's if, though, and we're not sure. This warm water popping off coast of Western Africa below. Debbie comes a tropical cyclone. Chris is in cooler waters. It's still a tropical storm. It's Texas. Ernesto's in the middle of the Atlantic. The Gordon's in the main development regions moving into the Caribbean. It's a Cat 4. It weakens down. Helene's also a Cat 4. That also weakens down. It does redevelop and moves out to sea. Isaac forms. We'll let the game keep going. So right now we're looking at this, the southeast coast, the southeast area off the United States. We're looking at anywhere between 26.2, 26.2, 27 around the Bahamas, 28. The Gulf is at 26, maybe a patch of 25 in there. 28 around the rim. And the Caribbean's looking at a solid 28. So we're not really looking for major hurricane conditions, major hurricane sustaining conditions, at least for the ocean, unless we're looking at the Eastern Pacific, patches of 30, mostly 29, or the main development region, still at upper 28s, and we'll look at 29, but you could still get a hurricane out of this. Joyce Kirk forming subtropics. Kirk's a hurricane, makes landfall in North Carolina. Joyce makes landfall as a hurricane in Florida. We're beginning to cool off the North Atlantic. The ice should begin forming any minute now. Leslie becomes a tropical storm in the Atlantic, becomes a Cat 1 hurricane. Nadine forms. Cat 2 Milton. Leslie reformed to come to a tropical storm that hits Louisiana. Not many majors this season, but it's mainly because the water's been cool. Is sleep a myth for you? It's not a myth. I just sleep late. Oscar forms in... Yeah, it forms off the coast of Africa, but it doesn't get much further than that. The water in the Gulf and off the southeast is cooler than where it should be. It's dropping off, and also in the Caribbean it's getting quite cold now. But it's still favorable, at least in the western part. But this is a lot cooler than where it was like last year, or the season before this. So nothing's really gonna form in this right now. If I look at sea temperature anomalies, yeah, you can see the problem. Subtropics are warmer than where they should be. So these are running 1 to 3 degrees above normal. But the actual tropical development areas where storms actually are supposed to like track through, running like 2 degrees below normal in many areas. Average in the western part of the Caribbean, a little bit warmer. Around this Honduras, the Bay of Honduras here. The Gulf of Honduras. Main development region, it's colder on the south end, warmer on the north end. It's colder in the Eastern Pacific as well. And as far as tracks go, we've had 2 major hurricanes. Had one in the Caribbean, in the Western Caribbean around here. And we had one in the main development region out here. But other than that, barely any hurricanes. Mostly tropical storms, and they've all been up here in the subtropics for the most part. Had a few U.S. impacts. Had one tropical storm in North Carolina, 1 hurricane in Florida, 2 tropical storms in the Gulf Coast, on the Gulf Coast, 1 hurricane. But other than that, not too many storms out there. We're gonna be fair for this year. This year's total value, 140. So it was like, if we're considering this, look at past ACE seasons. 140 is on the lower end of this, but that's 140. This is like it's one average season, but like that's 140 compared to a season that was at 9, 6, and 3. We did not have that many long-lasting storms this year, so this didn't really matter. We'll see what 2031 brings, though. I'm gonna go use the bathroom, and I'm gonna come back. Alright, I'm back. Alright. Keep the season going. Alright, 2031. We're beginning in January. Let's see how far into it we get. V water off the Gulf off the west coast of Mexico is colder than what it should be. Gulf is colder than what it should. Gulf of Mexico is colder than what it should be. Caribbean's colder than what it should be. The subtropics are not colder than what they should be. They're warmer. We should start seeing a reversal trend around here somewhere. The negative anomalies have to break at some point. (25°C) isotherm is retreating inside the Red Sea, but this should start moving back north again. Alright, almost all the Red Sea, I imagine, is above 26°C. So that means the eastern Mediterranean should begin warming up into 25°C territory very shortly. Already seeing specks of that happening around Egypt. The Gulf has had a major reversal. So is the southeast coast of the U.S. They're all above 25°C now, for the majority. Not the entire Carolina coast, but that's coming. Most of the Caribbean's above 25°C. A decent amount of it is around 27, 28. Gulf is around 26 for most of it. Southeast coast also around 26. So we'll see what happens. The jet stream's starting to move north. The Gulf is warming up now. The Western Caribbean's warming up even more. Seeing those 30°C isotherms pop up, starting to move to the north. Also seeing them off Africa, seeing them in the Eastern Pacific, and we're seeing them in the forests on the equator. Most of the Gulf around Florida, it's around 29°C. 28 in the western half of the Gulf. In the Caribbean, it's 29 in the northwest part, but the eastern part's hovering around 27, 26. The western part's really going to carry the basin. Not too many storms this year. I think we had 0. No, we had one. Beryl, it's going to be a major hurricane that hits North Carolina. Dexter is going to be a tropical storm that hits Mexico. Aaron's a major hurricane that impacts the Cabo Verde Islands. Fernand's a major hurricane that hits the Texas-Mexico border. Gabriel's a Cat 5 in the middle of the Atlantic. Should begin re-intensification here soon. Melda's a Cat 4 out in the open Atlantic. Umberto's a Cat 1 that hits Mexico. Season's a bit active. Let's see what happens. At our first 35°C isotherm pop up in the MDR. Right after that, we have our sea ice starting to form in the North Atlantic as well. Winter is fast approaching. As we're entering the end of the season, some storm Barbara forming in the Eastern Pacific. The Atlantic, Southeast Coast 26, Gulf 27, 26, Western Caribbean 28, and then the Eastern Caribbean still around 26. There's no more 30° isotherm in the Eastern Pacific, and it's disappeared in the Atlantic except for near the equator, and there's no more 30° isotherm anywhere on the map. The Northern Gulf's starting to cool off below 25. Eastern Pacific, 25° isotherm is pulling back rapidly. In the Gulf, the rate of pullback is quite slow. It's not pulling back as much as it did the year before. The Caribbean this year looks to stay above 26°C. It looks to stay that way. It looks to stay above 25, and most of it right now is 26°C or around 27 in the warmest areas. And just how close it's going to get. Most of the Gulf is below 25 now. Only the southeastern Gulf is above it. The Bahamas are half and half. above and below 25. Eastern Pacific has some warming, and we're having maybe our first 30 degrees Celsius isotherm was about to pop up. MDR slowly warming up, 25, 26 for most of it. 25 Celsius isotherm has hit the Cabo Verde Islands. And from this point, we should begin to start seeing all of this yellow begin to transition up north as time goes on. Caribbean, most of it's around 27 now, I imagine, starting to approach that 28. The tropical Atlantic is hitting 27, 28 in some places, say average 27. Caribbean is 28 in the western half. We'll still average around 27 and a half. Gulf is starting to be almost fully above 25. We're going to gauge it around 26 is the average for the Gulf. Because we're going to have some areas that are close to 27 in the southern part. Off the southeast coast of the U.S., the southwest Atlantic, looking at 26 degrees. That's off of the form. It's Bertha. We have Hurricane Cristobal comes off the African coast, West African coast. At 20 and 9s in the Western Caribbean, and we're starting to get 30s to fill in the Western Caribbean, and we're having 30s fill in the tropical Atlantic. Dolly forms. It's a tropical storm, but weakens as it approaches eastern Florida. Edward's a hurricane in the Caribbean. We now have 28 Celsius waters around most of Florida. Faye moving in. Tries to utilize that water, it's not able to. 29 degrees Celsius waters around most of Florida now. The Western Caribbean, we're looking at 31 degree isotherm waters, so it's pretty hot. Looking at 32 possibly. If a tropical cyclone can get in there with the right conditions, it will explode. Trust me, it will do it. Cat 2 hurricane that hits around Tampa in western Florida. That warm water around Florida is helping with intensity, but we haven't had too many storms again in the southwest part of the basin yet. Isaias is moving westward. Comes major hurricane. Cat 4 that hits Cuba. Josephine's a Cat 5 that hits Cuba as well. It also hits around Tampa. It's north of the Fort Myers area. Marco's a tropical storm that hits eastern Venezuela or northern Guyana. Starting to cool it off. Western Caribbean still above 29 for the most part. Most Caribbeans at 28 or above. So if the storm does get in there, it should do really well. Cat 3 Omar hits Cuba. Cat 2 Paulette hits the Yucatan. 30 degrees Celsius isotherm in the Caribbean's pretty much almost gone. It's fully gone now. Still a decent amount of 29s in the southwest part of the basin of the region, but it's starting to cool off. The southwest Atlantic is cooling off, getting closer to 25 Celsius the average. The Gulf's also cooling off. 25 Celsius range is increasing. 26 is reasonable for most of the Gulf, but that temperature is also going down slowly. Ice pack in the North Atlantic is pretty large, as usual. And it's a new year. The jet stream, that's also like at a mid-range position. It's still trying to get out of its summer position. You can clearly see it's not in the summer position anymore by how far south this storm is. But we're starting to get away from that summer position. We're getting there. This was the average. These were all the tracks in 2032. We have some storms that cross over from the Atlantic into the Eastern Pacific. We have about 4 that do so. We have tropical storms that do it. Mostly tropical storms and depressions. We have a noticeable lack of storms right off Africa. There's not many right there. But also noticeable lack of storms in the tropical Atlantic in general. They're either forming north of the tropical Atlantic area or they're forming west of it. Hey Jaden, what's going on? So they're forming north or west of the tropical Atlantic mostly. We have a lot of storms that form off the southeast coast north of the Greater Antilles around here. And we have a lot of Florida impacts. We have multiple tropical storms, multiple hurricanes. We have one major hurricane that goes right into the peninsula. We have a Cat 2 that also impacts it. Cuba, likewise, has multiple impacts. 3 major hurricane impacts in one season. Spain only has one Cat 2 and a tropical storm that goes through it. Jamaica has a near miss, but it doesn't miss that tropical storm. And in general, just the Florida, Cuba, this area has had an active season. Whereas the Gulf Coast itself is pretty quiet. Pretty quiet away from Florida. You got back from your trip? Nice. What did you do on your trip? If you won't mind, telling everybody. This season had 16 named storms, 20 hurricanes, 3 majors, 1 Cat 5. Ace is lower than typical, it seems. Average ace seems to be around 150, at least for right now. But $91 billion in damage is a lot. Strongest storm was Josephine, which is a 177 mile per hour Cat 5 hurricane. Let's keep going. Season doesn't just end there, keeps going. That was a really deep extratropical cyclone. The jet stream dipped really far south there. Had a tropical wave attempt to form in the mountains of Mexico. You went to the water park, ate, and went home? Okay. I haven't been to a water park in a bit of time. I should probably go to one. I'm not sure when though. Okay. The East Pacific's quite warm. South of Mexico, looking at 28, 29. It's pretty warm. Caribbean's hovering around 25, barely 26 in many areas. The Gulf is at it's below 25, looking at around 24. Probably getting close to 25 now, but we were looking around 24. Southeast, off the southeast coast of the U.S., Southwest Atlantic, we're looking at 20. We're looking at 25 as an average. The further north you go, it drops around 24, 23. And further south, you're looking at around the Bahamas, for example. You're looking at 27 at max. The main development region is really warming up as we head into June. A lot of 28s. And we're getting 30 degrees Celsius isotherm patches popping up in here. Eastern Pacific has cooled down. You're starting to see 28 Celsius pop up in the Western Atlantic. We do have a cool spot in the Eastern Caribbean now, so we'll see how that plays the impact. That kills off Tropical Storm Anna. The Gulf is starting to warm up more. We should have 29 Celsius in the Gulf very soon. Yeah, there we go. You have 29 Celsius in the Gulf officially. You might get more of it later. East Pacific starting to re-warm up again. Tropical Atlantic out here. Get 30 degrees Celsius is pretty widespread. And then 29 degree isotherm in the Western Atlantic is still there. The Gulf, Northern Caribbean is still there. So if a storm does get in there, it could become a major if conditions are right. Doesn't look likely though. Danny becomes a major hurricane in the tropical Atlantic, moves out. It's in the subtropical Atlantic now, but should weaken and dissipate. Elsa forms out of a system that formed from subtropics. Fred is a hurricane, but it weakens down, degenerates. Grace is a hurricane. Henri is a major hurricane, but weakens down as it hits toward Cuba. Comes like a Cat 2, I think, at landfall, or like high-end Cat 1. In the Gulf, it's cooled down quite a bit, 26. Off southeast coast, we're looking at 25, 26. It's not enough to get a storm to develop out of tropical depression status. Eastern Pacific and the tropical Atlantic looking warmer than the Caribbean and the Gulf right now. So storms are going to probably form, going to have the best formation chances here and here, but not too much here. But we'll see how it goes. Okay, the Gulf is pretty cool. Caribbean, we're hovering around 26. 27, 28 is in the eastern part, but we're hovering around 26.5 for the Caribbean right now. If we did an approximation. Half the Gulf is at 25 degrees Celsius. Most of the tropical Atlantic south of 20 degrees north latitude is hovering around 27. Eastern Pacific is hovering around 26, except for in the far eastern, except for getting out into the open Eastern Pacific. We're looking at 30 degrees Celsius of the isotherm directly south of a 20 degrees Celsius isotherm. It's a pretty tight gradient there. Ice pack is still large in the North Atlantic, but it should begin melting a lot for 2034. We have 29 degrees Celsius isotherm forming in the Caribbean. We could be close to having a 30 degree isotherm pop up somewhere in the Southwest Caribbean soon. And there we go. We have it. Now, whatever storm actually takes advantage of that is the question. But we do have mirror 30 degrees Celsius isotherms in both the Eastern Pacific and the Western Caribbean, and they're merging together. Most of the Caribbean's above 28 by now, definitely around 29 as an average. Gulf, I'm placing that at 27, and off the southeast coast, we're also placing that at 27, maybe 28 if we're looking at it. We'll place it at 28. We'll place it at 28 for off the U.S. East Coast, southeast coast. We'll place that at 28. Most of the Caribbean's at 30 degrees Celsius right now. So if any storm does get in there, it's going to have a really good time. Alex is a Cat 4, first storm in season. Hits the eastern part of Hispaniola, so it hits the Dominican Republic. Bonnie comes in, Cat 4, hits east side of Dominican Republic. We see our first 35 degree isotherm right here. We have Agatha in the Eastern Pacific. Eastern Pacific's averaging about 28 degrees. 27, 28. The Caribbean's still well above average. It's cooking. Cooking like lava right now. If we look at how hot it is, the majority of the Caribbean, at least 1 degree Celsius above normal. Many areas are looking at 2, and patches of 3 degrees Celsius above where it should be. Maybe 4. We look at 3.5. That's 33 degrees Celsius. It's very warm. Colin, Cat 4 major hurricane that goes to the Bahamas, southeastern Florida, and makes landfall in the Gulf around Alabama. We have another storm that forms Danielle. Earl, Cat 4, makes landfall in Nicaragua and goes through Honduras. Danielle misses, but Faraz, a Cat 5 that hits Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Almost all storms this year have been major. The 30 degree isotherm in the Caribbean is starting to wane down now. Starting to have 29 degrees Celsius being the dominant thing. Main development region looking at 27, 28. I'll say 28 right now. Off the southeast coast, we're looking at 27. Farther south, we're looking at 28. And for most of the Gulf, we're looking at 27. 27.5 is the average for right now. but I think the season might be shut as we're starting to see the jet stream move south. The average storm track is now like we're at the U.S.-Canada border storm track of extratropical systems. So we're going a little bit higher. So we dip a bit lower. We're in the United States, the northern U.S. now. So it's only going to continue to drop more down from here. Southeast coast, we're dropped to about 25. Main development region, we're at 27. Patch of 29. Caribbean, we're at 27. For most of it, Gulf, we're at 25.7. In South, and we already mentioned Southeast. Eastern Pacific, we're looking similar to the Caribbean, maybe a little bit colder. We're looking at maybe 26.8 or something like that. Farther south, we're looking more like 27.5. For the Caribbean, it seems that most of it is now below 26 degrees Celsius. We're still above 25, but we're below 26. So tropical development is going to be hard here, even if we have ideal conditions. It's going to be difficult to get a storm. Now let's see how it goes. Starting to warm up already. The Gulf is already almost completely 25°C or higher. Southeast coast, we're looking at 25°C. Sea is spreading, so I'm still going to give it like 24.5. Along the coast is all above 25°C. Main development region / tropical Atlantic have cold water 24°C below in the western part of the forecast of the area, but in the eastern part closer to Africa, we're looking at, look at the graph, look at 28, 29 in some places, have some 30 degrees Celsius popping up southwest of Liberia. Eastern Pacific got 27 widespread, some 29s and some 30 in the southwest part, closer to the equator. In the Caribbean, we're looking at 28 in Central Caribbean, starting to spread north. The jet stream's also starting to move north now. We're moving it out of the U.S., starting to moving it into Canada and into Northern Europe. First East Pacific storm, Adrian, tropical storm. In the Beatrice got 2 in the East Pacific. We have 30 degrees Celsius isotherm to once again in the Caribbean Sea. 29 for most of it. Some patches cooler, but 30 degrees Celsius really starting to take over the Caribbean. Cat 2 Arlene to start off the Atlantic in July. The Gulf, we're looking at 27, 28. I'm going to say 28. We're looking at high 27, so we're looking at 28 as an average for the Gulf. Off the southeast coast, we're looking more at 27. But we're approaching 28 here too. The Caribbean, we're at 29.7 because we have 30 degrees Celsius encompassing a large amount of the Caribbean. Eastern Pacific is warmed way up. We're looking at probably the same as the Caribbean. Large areas of 30 degrees Celsius. Storms do get going there. They're going to have a lot of energy. Deborah might be it. Cat 5. Cindy comes to Cat 3 in the Gulf. It hits Texas around Freeport. Another Cat 5 in the Eastern Pacific. Dawn's a tropical storm / hurricane that impacts the Caribbean islands. It's a Cat 2 that goes in Mexico. Fernandez, a Cat 4 in the Eastern Pacific. Franklin's going to be a major Cat 4 major hurricane in the Caribbean. Still large amounts of the Caribbean are above 29 degrees Celsius, so still can make a big play here. Gert is taking advantage of the warmer waters in the tropical Atlantic that it can find. Cat 3 status. It's what it manages to achieve. Now, the Caribbean seems to be slightly warming up again. We still have very warm water in the Caribbean, so stuff can happen. Off the southeast coast of the U.S., we're looking at 23 degrees Celsius as an average. In the Gulf, we're looking around 26 for most of it, but we're starting to get closer to 25, and maybe we might drop below 25 as an average very soon. Caribbean's still warm, but we're losing the 29 degree isotherm. I believe most of it, the warmest is probably going to be, it's around 20, 8.5 or a little bit warmer than that, but most of the Caribbean's now around 27, 26, with the Northwest Caribbean being at 25 degrees Celsius. Most of the Gulf is now below 25 degrees Celsius now, almost, or close to or below 25 degrees Celsius. Only a small amount in the Bay of Campeche is above 25 significantly. We're at 26 in Bay of Campeche. Some areas may be reaching 27. Caribbean average, we're looking for 26 for the entire area. Tropical Atlantic, we're looking at 26 or 27 further south. And then further north, we're looking at 24, 23. Hey, Agent 4, what's going on? Welcome to the stream. Eastern Pacific, we're looking at 28 in the eastern part, along like the Central American coast. Out to sea, we're looking like 26, 27 right now. Ice pack should be melting as well up there. I started this stream because Hurricane Beryl in real life just reached Cat 5 status about 3 hours ago, officially. So that's why I'm doing this stream, just to like have a little celebration for it, and just have like people talk to me if they have any questions or anything that they want to talk about. The Mediterranean is still quite split in half, but 28 degrees Celsius isotherm is expanding. The Gulf, I think we're at 27 for most of it. The Caribbean, we're at 28. East Pacific, we're at 27. And then off the southeast coast, we're looking around 24 for now. Main development region or tropical Atlantic, we're looking at, seems to be, most of it's over 25, but I think a good bet is probably to say 27, I feel. It's not all of it super warm. Caribbean, I think 29 is a good answer for most of this. Maybe 28.75, but 29 is a good answer for most of this. So we have this large, like, warm bubble here. Gulf, I'd say 28, maybe. Alberta, if Cat 4, it's Nicaragua. In early August. Eastern Mediterranean starting to get above 25 Celsius. Starting to warm up out there. I think we're near peak warmth now. Yeah, we should be near peak warmth now. Gulf 28. I believe this is near average. If you check. Yeah, this is below average to near average. In the middle, so this is normal. Caribbean's at 29 in some areas. Some areas like 28, but 29 is the peak, so say 28.5 here. 28.5 here. On southeast coast, I'd say we're running at 27. And then far southeast Pacific down here, we're running around 30 degrees Celsius or higher. Most of this. This I will also say is like tropical Atlantic's probably at 28 as an average. Now, is that going to affect things too much? I don't know. So far, this is what the season looks like. We barely have anything. If this storm that forms out, we have Beryl, we have Chris. Chris is a Cat 1 hurricane that makes landfall around Georgia. Beryl makes landfall in Florida. It re-strengthens and makes landfall in Texas. Stray storms. But we need, if we're going to make average, we got to get 9 more, which I doubt is going to happen. We get Debbie, tropical storm in the Caribbean. It's not too great. At least for statistics, it's not too great. Caribbean is still around like 28, I'd say. It's not like super warm. It's not like off the chart or anything. But it's warm enough to get a storm out of that. Gulf is probably at 27. You're getting down to 26 now. 26.5. Have Ernesto make a landfall in Louisiana. That gives them some rain. And yeah. So like 28 27.5 for the Caribbean, 26.5 for the Gulf, and then 26 for off the U.S. East Coast, Southeast Coast. Looking at that, the numbers for the season, you have five named storms, 3 hurricanes, 1. It's well below average. This is a bottom. I believe this is the worst season that we've had. No, we've had some bottom seasons. We had this one. Well, this one's a little bit better. But yeah, this is the worst season we've had so far. That one's active season. That one's a low active season. It's average-ish season, lower end. Average season. I think this is actually the average. So like slightly below average, normal. Below average-ish, a little bit. Definitely below average. Very below average. And then here is like record low. Get some 188, so we have very average, so above average seasons. Had a hyperactive season at one point. I have to go back to this one. We had mostly, at least so far, it seems like we've had like above average to like below average seasons. I'm gonna go sleep now. Good night. Alright, good night, 4. Thanks for being on stream. I'll probably be streaming again tomorrow because I have time. But I don't know how long I'll be doing it for. Alright, let me just let the simulation run out. At least for this day. Well, this year, ever. Okay. Go back. So, out of 1 Cat 4, it made landfall in Nicaragua. Still significant, obviously. It's a major hurricane that hits a populated area. But for most of the season, that's like 1 hurricane make landfall in Texas. 1 tries to make landfall on the southeast coast. Tropical storm makes landfall in Louisiana. Not super impactful storms in terms of wind speed. These might cause a lot of flooding, but not very much in terms of actual like strength. Except for the first storm in the season down here. We could look back at other seasons and see what they were like at this time. So we'll try to do 0Z at this time, and we're gonna go back to the first season. 2024. 2024, we had a lot of storms centered in the Gulf. This was an average to above average season. Compared to 2025, less active. Still a decent amount of majors, but less active. Almost no storms in the Caribbean at all. Shocking. No storms in the Caribbean. Gulf, quiet except for 1 storm. And then tropical Atlantic was pretty active. We go to 2026. We had a Cat 5 hurricane that went straight through the Windward Islands, and 1 Category 3 hurricane that went straight into Hispaniola, south of Puerto Rico. And we had a lot of storms that hit the U.S. East Coast, relatively weaker. But this makes sense. The water was cooler up here, drier as well, so it makes sense. The next year, 2027, major hurricane impact on the U.S. East Coast. 2 of them. Not that many in the Gulf. Plenty of tropical storms in the Gulf. Cat 2 landfall in northeast Mexico. Cat 5 that makes landfall in the Yucatan. And 1 that makes landfall in South America. If 2 go out to sea in the Eastern Pacific from the Atlantic side. So active season. Another active season. This one was when a lot of storms focused heavily around the Caribbean, around the Greater Antilles. A lot of major impacts. A lot of like Cat 4s, Cat 5s making landfall in the Caribbean. Lots of devastation. But if we move north of that, the United States doesn't have a single major landfall this year. The Bahamas doesn't have one either because of the shield of all the islands getting hit. And then if we go south of that to here, Southern Caribbean has basically nothing going on. So it's basically just an island year where a lot of stuff hit the islands, some stuff off the Cabo Verdes, and some weaker systems hitting the actual mainland, except for like this 1 storm hit the Yucatan. one that passed right by it. This could have been catastrophic if it did actually hit, but I don't think it would have changed too much. Hyperactive season. This was the big one. Now, if we go up to 2029, change up things a little bit. We have one major hurricane that hits the U.S. East Coast, Idalia. We have another major hurricane that hits Cuba. We have two hurricanes that hit the East Coast of Florida. Tropical storm that hits Louisiana. Caribbean, relatively quiet except for that one major hurricane. Had one tropical storm that also went through there. Tropical Atlantic was pretty active. The Windward Islands didn't see too much activity. Most of it, they got plenty of close calls that skirted north of them. If the storms kept going, they would have had a very devastating year. But thankfully, the storms went north of them. In this simulation, though, it seems that, from what I remember, it seems that, at least in this one, Caribbean islands in general were spared more, but there were still major impacts this season compared to the last one. And we had an actual major hurricane impact on the U.S. soil this year. None for Central America or Mexico, though. Good to know. Good to note. 2030 was an average season, I would say. I wouldn't say it was below average. It's an average season, but it's a lot of weak tropical storms. Some hurricanes in there. I had two major hurricanes. Not a very strong season. Not a lot of high intensity, long track major hurricanes making a whole bunch of landfalls. But we did have a decent amount of tropical storms doing landfalls and a decent amount of impacts from those. So that's still notable. And in this year, the subtropics were more active than the deep tropics. And still in this year, Mexico did not get a major hurricane impact. Neither did anywhere in Central America from the Atlantic side. The Pacific side I have to check. Oh. Okay, so for 2031, this was a less active season, but we saw a major hurricane hit the U.S. East Coast. Got that off the list. A major hurricane hit Mexico. The streak ended, and a hurricane also hit them early. Another hurricane hit them. They had some tropical systems moving in the same area. Florida was completely spared. Gulf Coast, United States completely spared. Central America, below the Yucatan, completely spared. The Caribbean Islands, relatively quieter season. Only one storm really passed through. Most of the strongest storms peaked out in the tropical Atlantic, far away from people. And we did have this one major hurricane that went right into Cabo Verde Islands. This is something of note. This doesn't happen too often. Next season. This was the big season for Florida. I would say this is above average to hyperactive season. If you look at the stats right here. Look at the stats. If you look at the stats, it's an above average season because we have more weak storms. But we had plenty of impacts. Florida got decimated this season. Impact after impact after impact. We had Cat 3 hurricane, Cat 2, Cat 1, plenty of tropical storms to add more onto it. Cuba got hit badly this year. We had a Cat 5 hit Cuba, a Cat 4 hit the east coast of Cuba, Cat 3 hit the western tip of Cuba, tropical storms hit, Category 2 hit the southeastern part of Cuba. Very big season for Cuba. Hispaniola, not as big. They did have a Cat 2 come through and a tropical storm. Jamaica missed a Cat 5. Barely, but they were probably still in the eye wall, so they suffered significant damage from that most likely. Had a decent amount of storms that crossed over from the Atlantic into the Eastern Pacific. Had some crossover activity there. But nothing hit the Gulf Coast really of the U.S. besides the west coast of Florida. If we don't count the west coast of Florida, nowhere in the Gulf Coast of the U.S. got hit. East coast of the United States did not experience a major tropical cyclone this year. Did not experience one. They did experience a hurricane crossover, but they did not experience a major tropical cyclone coming from their part of the sea. But the west coast of Florida took a lot of damage, and Cuba specifically. Cuba and Florida had their worst seasons this year, I would say. 2833, less activity. We have 2 Gulf storms. Hurricane that hits southeast Louisiana, tropical storm that hits around Houston. No East Coast impacts. Of two near Cuba impacts. No storms no tropical cyclones impact Mexico or Central America as tropical cyclones. There are some storms out in the tropical Atlantic or in subtropics, but generally a quieter season, below average, not too much to talk about. This season, very important. Cat produced a lot of major hurricanes. This only had 7 storms, but you had 7 storms, 7 hurricanes, 6 majors. So let's talk about it. This season was when the Caribbean was super hot, but as we can notice, barely any storms, no storms off the coast of Africa. Some storms emerged in the tropical Atlantic, but they only gain their strength once they get into the Caribbean or just north of it. The Cat 5 that hits the east coast of Florida. This is coming off the previous season where Florida got not the previous season. It's coming off a season 2 years ago where Florida got absolutely decimated. So you had a Cat 5 hurricane hit Florida. The Cat 4 hurricane in Florida. Multiple storms went through the Bahamas or near them. Multiple major hurricanes. 2 major hurricanes hit Hispaniola. The Cat 2 also hit as well. Probably decent amounts of humanitarian crises from this. Central America gets a Cat 4 hurricane in Nicaragua. Cat 3 landfall in Yucatan. And then probably a tropical storm hits Texas. But this could lead to flooding. We have the same storm that was a Cat 4 that hit Florida is also a major hurricane on the U.S. Gulf Coast. It hit Mobile, Alabama as a Category 3 hurricane as it made landfall. So, impactful season, no doubt. If you look at the price range, $111 billion. Now, we look at the next season. We see southwest Atlantic around the Bahamas, quiet, relatively. The tropical Atlantic was where most of the activity was. 2 major hurricanes, a little bit. Some tropical storms formed out of there. But almost all the storms that formed in the tropical Atlantic became a hurricane at some point. We had 1 storm that formed in the southwest Atlantic that transitioned over Florida and became a Category 3 hurricane in the Gulf that made landfall in Texas. That caused a decent amount of damage. We had a Cat 4 hurricane that hit the Yucatan Peninsula, and that transitioned into tropical storm that hit east coast of Mexico, plus 2 other hurricanes, one being a Cat 2. So Mexico had a pretty active season. Caribbean Islands had a somewhat active season, not too active. Texas had a big season because they had their 1 major storm. But in general, quiet basin. And we just came off of this record quiet season where only had 3 hurricanes. 1 made landfall in Texas and Florida. Got that off the dome. 1 made a tropical storm landfall in Georgia. Another made tropical storm landfall in Cuba and Louisiana. And 1 made a tropical storm, trying to make a tropical storm landfall in Jamaica. Tropical depression over Central America. And we had 1 major hurricane, which is catastrophic, that formed, became a Cat 4 that hit Nicaragua head on. Probably caused a gigantic flooding crisis in Central America. And that was Alberto. If we check the damage that it did on its own, $17 billion is the total for the season. $13.5 billion comes from Alberto directly. So Alberto is responsible for most of the deaths this year. It also made landfall in the ABC Islands and possibly Venezuela as well. Oh, it made landfall in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and in Mexico again when it was a tropical depression. Alright, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I'll show Don's art tomorrow. But yeah, had fun with the stream. So we'll see you guys next time. Bye. I hope to see you guys later.